Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, dear gold medalist, dear colleagues and friends. On behalf of the Royal Danish Academy of Sciences and Letters, it is my privilege to welcome you all to this festive occasion where the renowned Professor Alain Aspect will receive the Niels Bohr Gold Medal for 2013. It is not for me to motivate the award, this will be done later. But I would like to mention that the first recipient of the medal was Niels Bohr himself in 1955 when he turned 70, hence the name and the exceptional standing of the award. Like Niels Bohr, Professor Aspect has worked in the field of quantum mechanics and has made a major contribution to quantum entanglement, which is a most intriguing problem also in the social sciences, I would like to say. The medal has not been awarded since 1982, and I want to commend the Danish Society of Engineers for taking the initiative to reactivate it at the occasion of the centenary of Bohr's atom model, which we are celebrating this year, and especially in these weeks. Today is actually Niels Bohr's birthday. He would have turned 128 years. But this is rather less important than the fact that his most important achievement turns 100 and is still acknowledged as basically sound. The discussion, of course, has not stopped, and I know that today's recipient of the Niels Bohr Medal has contributed creatively to the discussion of the model's merits and challenges. I also just want to briefly note that this magnificent house was the Bohr family's home for 30 years, from 1932 to 1962. It was originally built as a home for the brewer I.C. Jacobsen in mid-19th century, and after his death and later his only son's death, it was bequeathed as an honorary residence to men of science, and they were men then, to be awarded by the Royal Danish Academy and financed by the Carlsberg Foundation. Today it is used as a very popular venue for academic symposia and celebrations like the one we are having today. The Carlsberg Foundation in itself is a bequest from the old brewer. It was established in 1876, and since then it has played a major role in supporting science and scholarship in all fields. All of this simply goes to remind us all that while we celebrate Alain Aspect today and congratulate him in particular on his achievements, we are also celebrating scientific progress and creativity more generally. Actually, since this morning and until Wednesday afternoon, we are also having a symposium on creativity in science and society in honor of Niels Bohr, who created such a stimulating environment in post-war Copenhagen. And we are broadening the scope to include also other fields of scientific and artistic achievement. And I think it's very apt that Professor Aspect receives his medal surrounded by a symposia that is dedicated to scientific creativity, because what we really want to understand is how we harness these incipient ideas and make them work for the benefit of society. With these few words, I shall congratulate Alain Aspect once again and welcome you all to this celebration of the Niels Bohr Gold Medal 2013. Welcome.
Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this invitation. We are the Danish String Quartet, and I must say that we are very honored to have received this invitation to play for such bright minds today. And we would like to play for you two movements by our national composer, Carl Nielsen, the first and the last movement from his first string quartet in G minor. Thank you.
Your Majesty, Ambassador, Deputy Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear Professor Aspect. As Chairman and President of the Danish Society of Engineers, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all. Atoms. They are literally everywhere. Apart from the special company present here today, I expect only a few of you have actually seen them. The same goes with Niels Bohr's now 100 years old atomic theory. Though we know some outlines, only a few of us present today may truly comprehend the implications of Bohr's work. But when it comes to the understanding of the practical influence of Bohr's work, I think we can all relate. It is about being able to play a DVD. It's a possibility of surfing the internet and to find our way around with a GPS. It is also about production of energy, about the way we fight cancer, and the accelerating development of faster and more intelligent computers. None of these would have been the same if it wasn't for the 3 papers Bohr published 100 years ago. We are gathered here today to celebrate a scientist who managed to bring us closer to the understanding of what at that time seemed to be against all known laws of physics. And this is now 100 years ago. On Bohr's 60th birthday in 1945, my organization, the Danish Society of Engineers, made him a member of honor. 10 years later, we invented and created the Niels Bohr International Gold Medal in respect and in honor of the importance of his work. Niels Bohr himself received the first medal on the day he turned 70. So, Niels Bohr was the first person to receive the medal carrying his name. Since, the Niels Bohr medal was awarded 10 times between 1955 and 1982. Amongst the very honorable receivers have been Werner Heisenberg and John Archibald Wheeler, and of course Niels Bohr himself. Niels Bohr is primarily known as a great scientist. Obviously he was. But Bohr was more than that. He was also a mentor to many other scientists. He did not believe to have found the final answer to the many questions of physics, nor did he think that he could find the answers alone. Bohr invited many guests into this very house, where he lived with his family. He wanted to discuss, collaborate, and develop. He certainly did not lean back and relax after publishing his groundbreaking theories. Also, Bohr lobbied extensively for a new institute for theoretical physics. The institute, which would later bear his name, opened in 1921. In his opening speech, Bohr stated that the main objective of the institute was to lead an ever-increasing number of young people into the scientific fields of results and methods. Bohr's perspective on the use of his science was long-term and wide. He wanted to increase and spread the use of science and technology. As an engineer and representing all engineers in Denmark, I also truly support these thoughts. Just like Niels Bohr, I want today's youth to be tomorrow's scientists and engineers. The Danish Society of Engineers has in total awarded the medal to 10 great scientists. 10 people who have all made important contributions to the peaceful use of atomic science. In the 100th year of Niels Bohr's discovery, we wish to revisit that tradition, to emphasize how important science is to technology, to the society. Today we are applauding a great scientist with a medal, carrying the name of Niels Bohr. That specific scientist managed to close in the gap between common sense and atomic theory. This was a fundamental discussion between Einstein and Bohr. And on behalf of all engineers in Denmark, I wish to acknowledge the great work of you, Mr. Aspect. And also to thank you for being a great example for both other scientists and for students in the scientific field. I know you are not only a much respected scientist, you are also very inspiring in your work with students. Awarding the medal under these circumstances on this day could not have been possible without the kind and professional cooperation of the Royal Danish Academy of Sciences and Letters. Thank you for facilitating and housing this wonderful day in the respect and celebration of the 100 years of the scientific discovery of Niels Bohr. Also, I would like to thank the prize committee for a good and inspiring job. In a moment, we will present the Niels Bohr International Gold Medal. It is a great honor that we're able to continue another tradition of royal presenters. The medal was first presented to Niels Bohr himself in 1955 by His Majesty the King Frederick IX, and has also been presented by His Royal Highness the Prince Consort, and today, once again, by Her Majesty the Queen. I am truly grateful. It is a great honor for me to announce that the medal will be given to Professor Alain Aspect. Monsieur le professeur, c'est un honneur pour moi de vous décerner la médaille d'honneur Niels Bohr. Thank you. And now Tomas Bohr, the grandchild of Niels Bohr, will tell more about the stuff of physics, I think.
Your Majesty, Your Excellencies, dear Professor Aspect, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honor for me, on behalf of the committee, to motivate the choice of Alain Aspect for the reception of the Niels Bohr Gold Medal 2013. This choice fits perfectly with this year's celebrations of Niels Bohr himself, whose seminal trilogy on the constitution of atoms and molecules was written precisely a century ago. When Niels Bohr wrote these papers, he was accurately aware of the radical nature of his ideas and the huge difficulties to be expected in unifying them with the principles that had hitherto been so successful as the basis of theoretical physics. He presented his new vision in terms of two postulates. The first one basically says that atomic systems possess a number of stationary states which are dynamically stable despite being explicitly unstable by so-called ordinary mechanics. In these states, the atom is invisible, even though the electron is orbiting the nucleus at a high frequency. The atom only makes itself seen to the outside world when the electron jumps from one such state to another while emitting or absorbing light. And the second postulate states that the frequency, i.e. the color of this light, is not related in any simple way to the orbiting frequency of the electron, but to the difference between the energy of the initial and final states of the jump. Perhaps this sounds to us with our present knowledge as reasonable assumptions, but if one thinks it over more carefully, one realizes that they preclude any mechanistic description of the process by which the electron orbits the nucleus or makes its jump from one stationary orbit to the other. That is, we cannot in detail follow the electron in a well-defined path around the nucleus, since this would immediately lead to the emission of electromagnetic radiation, i.e. light, along the way, with a frequency closely related to that of the electron in its orbit. Moreover, the new rules also seem at odds with one of the most cherished principles of physics, causality, which expresses that everything has a cause and nothing can occur before its cause. This was formulated very pictorially by Rutherford in his initial reaction to the paper when Bohr submitted it to him in the spring of 1913. After expressing his satisfaction with the new results obtained by Bohr, he wrote, "There appears to me one grave difficulty in your hypothesis, which I have no doubt you fully realize. Namely, how does an electron decide what frequency it's going to vibrate at when it passes from one stationary state to another? It seems to me that you would have to assume that the electron knows beforehand where it's going to stop." He was right. Niels Bohr did fully realize this problem, but apparently he was prepared for such a radical departure from classical mechanics, actually more like a jump into the abyss. Even after quantum mechanics was invented in 1925 to 26, it has remained a mystery how nature can behave so strangely, although we now know how to do the calculations. In quantum mechanics, the wave function only determines the probability for a given outcome, and the standard assumption, often called the Copenhagen interpretation, is that this is all that we can predict, and thus that randomness, probability, and fortuitousness are ingrained in nature. That point of view was disputed by several of the founders of quantum theory, in particular by de Broglie, Schrödinger, and Einstein. In discussions with Einstein over almost 2 decades, Bohr was forced to continually sharpen his arguments. A particular blow came in 1935 when Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen published the paper that has gone down in history as the EPR paper. Here the authors attempted to show that quantum mechanics was incomplete in the sense that certain elements of what they called physical reality were not captured by the theory. They demonstrated that one could easily devise systems where 2 parts, e.g. particles separating after an explosion, remain correlated over large distances, even though both of them have properties, i.e. e.g. momenta or spin, which are unknown and even, according to quantum mechanics, unknowable. The measurement of, for example, a spin on one particle would then immediately predict the value of the spin on the other particle, although none of their values were well defined before the experiment. In fact, by measuring different components of the spin, one could assure that these values could not even in principle be simultaneously known, since they would be subject to the Heisenberg uncertainty relations. For Einstein, this counterintuitive result showed that quantum mechanics is not a satisfactory theory. When the EPR paper was published, Niels Bohr was working with Leon Rosenfeld on the problem of the measurability of electric and magnetic fields in quantum mechanics. Rosenfeld told the story as follows. This onslaught came down upon us as a bolt from the blue. Its effect on Bohr was remarkable. As soon as Bohr had heard my report of Einstein's argument, everything else was abandoned. We had to clear up such a misunderstanding at once. We should reply by taking up the same example and showing the right way to speak about it. In great excitement, Bohr immediately started dictating to me the outline of such a reply. Very soon, however, he became hesitant. No, this won't do. We must try all over again. We must make it quite clear. Eventually, he broke off with a familiar remark that we must sleep on it. The next morning, he at once took up the dictation again, and I was struck by a change of tone in the sentences. There was no trace in them of the previous day's sharp expressions of dissent. As I pointed out to him that he seemed to take a milder view of the case, he smiled. That's a sign, he said, that we are beginning to understand the problem. Bohr's reply was that, yes, nature is actually so strange. The quantum predictions are beautifully consistent, but we have to be very careful what we call physical reality. Niels Bohr's reply more or less put the debate to sleep for a good many years. During his lifetime, the idea of actually performing the EPR thought experiment seemed rather remote. It was therefore usually referred to as the EPR paradox, and the debate was viewed by most scientists as a philosophical issue which they were happy to forget. The prevailing attitude was often caricatured as shut up and compute. This attitude began to change slowly during the 70s, and today the seeds sown by the EPR paper have turned into a prolific part of theoretical physics. In this development, today's recipient of the Niels Bohr Medal, Alain Aspect, was one of the pioneers. The spark came in 1964, when John Bell published a surprising paper. He showed, even without invoking any specific model, that the very assumption that any physical variable could in principle be determined at any time would lead to a disagreement with the probabilities predicted by quantum mechanics. In fact, he found an inequality satisfied by the probabilities computed from such a classical model with so-called hidden variables, and showed that the quantum result would violate this inequality under appropriate conditions, thus changing the EPR paradox from the realm of philosophy into that of physics, where discussions can be settled by quantitative measurements and computations. This was the starting point for Alain Aspect. He read Bell's paper in 1975 and decided to focus his doctoral thesis on turning the EPR thought experiment into a real experiment using photons, and thus make the crucial test whether the quantum mysteries are explicable by so-called realistic hidden variables as hoped by Einstein. He went down to CERN to talk to Bell about his ideas. When he finished, Bell said, "Do you have a permanent position?" And after having been reassured on this important safety issue, they had a fruitful discussion. The results of the experiments were published 7 years later, so it was indeed important that Alain Aspect had a permanent position. In the experiments, it was shown that Bell's inequality was violated clearly in favor of quantum mechanics. The quantity that hidden variable theories would demand to be less than 2 came out to be 2.7, so the deviation was clear. Several earlier pioneering experiments by Clauser and others had already indicated a violation of Bell's inequality. However, the Orsay experiment of 1982 was the first one in which the crucial timing condition or delayed choice was invoked. Thus, the decision of what precisely the two spatially separated counters measured changed so rapidly that no signal could connect them between the two measurements. Thereby, the beautiful experiments by Aspect and his colleagues tested the quantum predictions in a more stringent way, which has inspired a whole generation of later and still ongoing experiments where the impossibility of communication between the two counters is ever more strictly upheld, so far still showing a clear violation of Bell's inequality. Actually, the possibility of delayed choice was already anticipated by Bohr in his essay on the discussion with Einstein, written in 1949. There he wrote, "It may be added that it obviously can make no difference as regards observable effects obtained by a definite experimental arrangement, whether our plans of constructing or handling the instruments are fixed beforehand, or whether we prefer to postpone the completion of our planning until a later moment when the particle is already on the way from one instrument to the other." It was a slightly different experiment. I don't know whether Bohr imagined that such an experiment could be carried out in practice, but he would certainly have been impressed with Alain Aspect's work if he had lived long enough to see it. The results of Aspect's experiment were quickly known in Denmark. John Archibald Wheeler, who received the Niels Bohr Medal in October 1982, commented on them during his stay in Copenhagen to the Danish paper Information. In conclusion, he said, "Hereby the doubt has ended. There is now an experimental proof of the most revolutionary principle in the history of science." Thank you.
Votre Majesté, Excellences, chers collègues et amis, mesdames et messieurs, apprendre que l'on va recevoir une médaille dont le nom est celui d'un géant de la physique et découvrir que les récipiendaires passés de cette médaille sont aussi des géants de la physique, c'est ce que j'ai vécu il y a quelques mois. Et c'est une sensation un peu effrayante. Mais je me suis rappelé la phrase de Jean de Salisbury, le théologien du XIIe siècle. Nous sommes des nains assis sur les épaules des géants. Et je suis sûr que ce sont des géants bienveillants qui tolèrent les nains s'agitant sur leurs épaules. And now I switch to English, since you know that the lingua franca of science these days is English. So, of course, in English, I start again. Your Majesty, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. Being informed of the awarding of a medal with the name of a giant and finding that the previous laureates were themselves giants is a shattering experience. It took me some time to calm down and remember the famous sentence of the 12th century theologist, John of Salisbury, "We are like dwarfs sitting on the shoulders of giants." I'm convinced that the giants are benevolent and forgiving the dwarf making efforts to reach to their shoulders. It was for me a wonderful surprise to discover that the last recipient of the Bohr Medal in 1982 was John Archibald Wheeler. It immediately reminded me that in 1985 I received an award from his hands at the time of a conference organized in Boston for the centennial of Niels Bohr. I had been astonished by the kindness of this great physicist accepting to hand an award to the impertinent young French physicist who had dared to put to test the so well-established theory of quantum mechanics. Now, I've just understood that John Wheeler already knew of my experiment at that time, since he mentioned it when he received the medal in 1982, and this I didn't know, so it's a wonderful surprise. The citation for the medal states that the committee awards the medal for experiments regarding the Bell's inequality test, an important contribution to settling the debate between Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, and a demonstration of the intriguing character of entanglement now at the root of quantum information research. End of quote of the committee. Allow me to comment a little bit in addition to the wonderful presentation by Thomas. Entanglement is the second of the extraordinary concepts that make quantum mechanics definitely the most revolutionary physical theory ever. The first revolutionary quantum concept was wave-particle duality, the most emblematic example of Bohr's complementarity. The interpretation of both concepts, wave-particle duality and entanglement, were the object of Homeric debates between Einstein and Bohr. We have all heard the stories of Einstein trying to find an inconsistency in the Heisenberg inequality, uncertainty relation, the mathematical relation expressing wave-particle duality. And we have all heard that Bohr always came with a convincing rebuttal of this objection. But in 1935, Einstein came with a completely different objection. Rather than addressing the behavior of a single quantum particle, for which the Heisenberg relation states that the position and the velocity cannot be both perfectly defined, Einstein considered two quantum particles, and he discovered a quantum state perfectly consistent with the quantum formalism. In this state, named an entangled state by Schrödinger, both the velocity of the two particles and their positions are strictly correlated. Therefore, by making a measurement of the position of one of the two particles, we can know with certainty the position of the other one. But we could have measured the velocity of the first particle and then infer the value of the velocity of the second. Since we could have waited until the last moment to choose between measuring the position or the velocity of the first particle, this choice could not have affected the second particle far away, because no influence can propagate infinitely fast. It cannot go faster than light, according to Einstein's relativity. Einstein concluded that both the position and the velocity of the second particle were perfectly well determined before the measurement. a possibility not envisaged by the standard formalism of quantum mechanics, which is thus incomplete, Einstein argued. He did not say, Einstein, that this formalism was incorrect. He said that it was not the end of the story, that the story had to be refined. The reasoning was published in March 1935 in a paper authored by Einstein, Polonsky, and Rosen. We heard about it. It took Bohr, after many efforts, as far as I understand, no more than 4 months to get his reply published in October of the same year. His position was that the EPR reasoning was not sufficient to conclude that quantum mechanics was incomplete. I have read many times Bohr's paper. You know the experience. And I must admit that the detailed reasoning is not the clearest one could dream of. But isn't it Bohr himself who declared that, quote, truth and clarity are complementary, end of quote. I.e. that by trying to be clear, one might lose the depth of the scientific reasoning. In fact, reading both papers, the one of Einstein, the one of Bohr, one could conclude that adopting one or the other point of view was only a debate about the interpretation of the quantum formalism, since Einstein and Bohr did not disagree on the result of the calculation, but on the conclusion to draw about the need or the possibility to complete the formalism. As you said, it took another 30 years until John Stuart Bell totally changed the situation when he discovered that taking seriously Einstein's point of view led to inequalities in contradiction with the prediction of quantum mechanics. The debate had thus shifted from the domain of epistemology to the domain of physics, since it could be settled by questioning nature, by doing what we love to do, experiments. 3 pioneer experiments were carried out in the early 70s. 2 of them, by Clausen, Friedman, and by Frey, vindicated quantum mechanics against Bell's inequalities. But these experiments were quite different from the ideal scheme, and it took me almost a decade to take advantage of the dramatic progress in optics, in particular in lasers, and come with a series of 3 experiments closer and closer to the heart of the debate, to the core of the debate. These experiments were eventually carried out with outstanding young master students, Philippe Grangier, who is here, and Jean Dalibard, who could not come. The last experiment was addressing for the first time the core of Einstein's reasoning, as emphasized by Bell, since it was possible to rapidly switch at the last moment the setting of the measuring apparatus in order to prevent any possibility of a communication at a velocity respecting the speed limit of the velocity of light, which is quite a high limit. The result was clear. Bell's inequality was still violated. Bohr was right. A pair of entangled particles, even widely separated in a relativistic sense, remain a global object that could not be considered as made of distinct components with individual properties. It could be thought that it was the end of the story. But in fact, something extraordinary happened. Other giants, in particular Feynman, the recipient of the 1973 Bohr medal, realized that entanglement is definitely different from wave-particle duality and proposed to use it for new application and lay the ground for a new field of research, a vibrating field in which Denmark has several world leaders. And this field is quantum information. Quantum information involves totally new ways of processing and transmitting information, such as quantum computing, quantum cryptography, and quantum teleportation. If these new methods become practical and available on a large scale, they may well change our society as deeply as the inventions of the transistor, the integrated circuits, and the laser, the fruits of the first quantum revolution which changed our society into the information and communication society. When I go back to the original papers of Einstein and Bohr, now that we know all the achievements based on entanglement, I am yet more impressed by these giants who had realized immediately that entanglement was a new revolutionary concept. If we can speak of a second quantum revolution based on entanglement, there is no doubt that Niels Bohr is one of the fathers of that revolution. What could have I dreamed of better than receiving a medal named by this fantastic giant? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Aspect. On behalf of the Danish Society of Engineers, I would like to invite you all to an award reception in the conservatory, just this beside here. And let me once again thank you all for participating in commemorating one of the greatest scientists of all time and honoring also Professor Aspect. Thank you.